So does bodybuilding programming differ from powerlifting programming then?
I would say so. Yeah. So I think a good way to look at it is that a power lifter must do the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, right? And the goal is to do one rep as heavy as you possibly can to get the biggest total. Um, while a bodybuilder, you could make an argument, would benefit from using the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, but I don't think you could say that a bench press is any more important than a row for a bodybuilder, or a squat any more important than maybe a military press or something like that. Because the goal is to get symmetrical development over the whole body. So I think the bodybuilders can learn a lot from powerlifters. One thing that powerlifters do effectively is that progressive overload is the forefront of their mind. They're always trying to lift more weight, and they use three very effective movements. So I think a bodybuilder should have kind of a core group of compound movements that they stick with and try to become experts with. Then they all have more accessory movements, and they include things for other body parts, of course. But there are definitely some similarities. So having a core group of exercises, compound lifts that effectively train a lot of muscle groups at once, and that you try to progressively overload over time. And then there should be some strength focus as a bodybuilder, but I don't think it should be the main focus. It's good to train across a variety of rep ranges. There's a fair amount of theoretical reason to do that to optimize muscle growth.
So do you think that a bodybuilder could reach their max potential if they left out the bench squat and the deadlift? Do you think that those are necessary movements, or do you think for bodybuilding purposes they could achieve maybe their max results doing some type of variation, like sticking maybe to dumbbells, or not doing deadlift, sticking to the rows and then doing other exercises? Because there's bodybuilders who don't like to do those exercises, but do you think that they're necessary?
Yeah, no one likes to squat.
I think I do not. I don't think they're necessary. I think they're very good tools. But I totally agree. If you did incline bench, RDL, and front squat, you could probably get just as good of a physique. Or even if you had to do like leg press, hip thrust, and like a dumbbell press. So long as you can take the same principles, progressively overload them, fill in any gaps that you might not get from that development. Like you might need to do some weighted back extensions if in that last situation I provided. So I wouldn't say that the big three are a requirement. And I know right now it's very popular for bodybuilders to cross compete and vice versa. I do it myself. But it's important that I don't think we should put the big three on such a pedestal that bodybuilders start thinking they have to do them.
So you mentioned like the dumbbell bench press. So we know that you said progressive overload, but wouldn't using like a barbell movement have a lot more, you're using more volume obviously versus a dumbbell movement. So couldn't you argue that a barbell movement would be better for bodybuilding purposes in
You
that
could
sense?
make an argument. You could make an argument, but when you're talking about a volume, you're talking about volume load, and that's reps times sets times the load on the bar. But really, you can't compare the volume load of one movement to another. You can only compare volume load like kind of within the same movement, because the different equipment, body position you have to be in, and sometimes ranges of motion are going to mean that the amount of weight you can lift is and the amount of really the muscle activation and stimulus you get are going to be different. So like we could compare by that logic, a decline bench is better than a bench press.
That's true.
Um, so or a calf raise would be the best exercise of all, because you get that that advantageous lever. So I think you really have to more so look at volume load within a movement. And then if you're going to be looking at kind of like how you spread out your volume over a lot of different body parts, look at just total reps that you do in an effective intensity range.
But,
Um,
but wouldn't the tonnage be totally different? Like the total tonnage of the workout. So if I did an all dumbbell, because I've known bodybuilders who do this, they'll do all dumbbell one day and all barbell the next. Those two tonnages are going to be totally different.
they will. And what I'm saying is that the tonnage probably isn't the best way to compare those two workouts because you're using different movements. For example, you might just get just as much chest activation in terms of the actual stimulation of the muscle using lighter weights with dumbbells because it's not as stable, because there's additional range of motion. Like you're going to bring the dumbbell across your chest. There's going to be more, horizontal adduction there versus with the barbell. It's only going to move, in the fixed plane that it's in. So I would say that might not be the best way to look at it. If you want to compare volume across movements, a better way to do it is what's called comparing relative volume. So you multiply sets times reps times the percentage of 1RM that you're working at. And then you could get an idea of, okay, how is this, flat dumbbell press going to compare to a workout with barbell?
Do you like dumbbells better than barbell, Pete?
Yeah, for specific exercises, I never really heavily focused my training around powerlifting. I have more recently incorporated a lot more of the big three. But for years, honestly, I was a fan of using dumbbells over barbells for chest pressing exercises. Like you mentioned, there is an added range of motion, and the stabilization is going to be different. I think if I had to choose one over the other, there's benefits to both. But if I had to pick one, I would probably go back to just doing dumbbells if my goal was specifically for bodybuilding.
And I don't think that's necessarily a bad call. I mean, even more than what we've already mentioned, dumbbells do allow you to have the shoulders move independently. And you will typically see more injuries on a bench press than you will see a dumbbell press. The reason I like barbells more, it's more from a programming perspective. Typically, if you go to the gym, the smallest jump you're going to see between one pair of dumbbells and the next is 5 pounds per dumbbell. You're going to go from the hundreds to the 105s, and that's like a 10% increase in load. However, with the barbell, you can add 2.5s on there and go up half that. So I like personally to program with barbells just because it allows me to make smaller increments in load, which is probably more appropriate for advanced lifters. But that's not to say you couldn't just set up some different type of progression scheme where you're trying to get more reps before you make a jump in load. You just have to get a little more creative with it.
The one thing I hate about dumbbells is I always find it to be more tiring to get them in place than anything else.
Yeah, once you reach a certain strength point, I think dumbbells become more of an inconvenience than anything to use.
Yeah, so if you're lazy, they are a problem. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very true. That's very true.
I hate that, man. Then you get it takes me like a minute. You pull them off the rack and then you put them on your lap. You sit there for a minute. You're like, all right, now I got to kick these things up in position. Pain in the ass.
Yeah, and then you got to do the roll across the gym floor. If you're grabbing the hundreds from the other side, just roll it.
The good old gym roll.
And then you get them out of position once, and you're like, do I really want to do this? And you probably just go over and bench press anyway. So.
Exactly. See? So we solved that discussion.